What would compel you to stockpile provisions like a squirrel, dedicating months to readying for a winter still half a year off? To disregard all who said we were insane? Helga Lind understood the answer from the start. Beneath her cabin's floorboards, she was interring potatoes, excavating a deep hole where the temperature remained constant and cool, ensuring nothing would freeze. Nothing would go bad. That was her winter strategy. Then Cordelia Blackwood appeared, her ornate carriage trundling up the muddy path. "What in the world are you up to?" she shouted, gazing down at Helga from her perch. "Putting away provisions," Helga replied without lifting her gaze. She lowered yet another crate into the dark cavity. Cordelia poked her head through the cabin doorway, her nose crinkling at the earthy scent. She observed Helga, down on all fours in the soil. Winter is still 5 months off. Just how many supplies could a single individual require? Far more than you imagine, more than the average person stocks up. Cordelia's husband had been gossiping. He claimed Helga was purchasing every potato, turnip, and cabbage across the entire valley. He mentioned she had been dehydrating meat since June. He insists you have enough provisions buried beneath this cabin to sustain a whole army. Cordelia let out a bright, piercing laugh. "People are beginning to gossip, Mrs. Lind. They say the Swedish widow has lost her mind from sorrow. They claim she's stockpiling food like a squirrel because she's scared of her own reflection." At last, Helga raised her head. Her icy blue gaze locked onto Cordelia's dark eyes. "My husband perished last winter due to insufficient stored provisions." Her tone was calm and low. "He ventured out to hunt during a blizzard because our supplies were dwindling, and he succumbed to the cold just 3 kilometers from home." Helga paused for an extended period. "I discovered his corpse 3 days afterward, once the snow had thawed sufficiently to reveal the spot where he had collapsed." Cordelia's smile wavered for just a moment. "That's dreadful, certainly, but surely the solution isn't to turn into a recluse encircled by root vegetables. The answer lies in being part of a community, depending on your neighbors, placing faith in civilization to support you." Helga lowered yet another crate into the hole, her motions unhurried and measured. Civilization offers no support when the snow is 1.8 meters deep, nor when the mercury hits minus 40 degrees Celsius. Neighbors are unable to assist when they're imprisoned in their own homes, starving at the same rate as you. Helga fixed her gaze on Cordelia once more. "I am stockpiling 270 kilograms of food beneath this floor," Helga elaborated her complete strategy. Beneath the cabin's floorboards, she had stored 270 kilograms of provisions: potatoes, turnips, carrots, cabbage, dried beans, dried meat, and preserved fruit. That quantity would suffice for 7 months, allowing her to never have to exit the cabin, ensuring she was prepared. Cordelia Blackwood merely shook her head, her immaculate curls jiggling with mirth. "7 months?" she queried. "A Montana winter lasts 4 months, at most 5 during a harsh year. You're getting ready for an event that will never occur." Yet Helga recalled her grandmother, who had endured a famine in Sweden. She recounted tales of winters stretching into June. Folks consumed bark and leather, and they ate items Helga refused to even mention. Her grandmother imparted a crucial lesson. You never truly know winter's duration until it ends. By then, it's too late to prepare. Cordelia brushed aside the arguments with a wave of her hand. "This is not Sweden, Mrs. Lynfist, but America, specifically Montana," she indicated with a sweep of her arm. "Trains and telegraphs connect us, and ranchers running herds of 100,000 cattle graze these valleys," Cordelia said, gathering her skirts. She announced her plan to leave as soon as spring arrived, adding that Helga was perched atop a mound of spoiled vegetables. "I trust you will recall this talk and see how unwise your decisions were." With that, Cordelia rode away in her carriage, abandoning Helga to her potatoes, her underground cellar, and the recollection of her late husband. Eric Lynfist was a decent man, yet he lacked foresight. Raised in Sweden alongside Helga, he never experienced true starvation. His upbringing was comfortable, insulated from the severe famines that forced countless Swedes to emigrate to America. Upon arriving in Montana in 1882, he observed the extended summers and fertile ground, concluding that wealth would come effortlessly. He constructed a log house, cleared land for cultivation, purchased livestock beyond his means, and laid in provisions sufficient for an average winter. But the winter, spanning 1885 to 1886, proved exceptional. Snowfall began in November and persisted unabated until April. The mercury dropped to -34 degrees Celsius and remained there for weeks. Eric's herd, acquired on debt, stood frozen solid in the pastures. Come February, their meager food supply was nearly exhausted, with only one sack of flour remaining. Helga was expecting their first baby. Eric picked up his hunting rifle and his thickest overcoat, promising he'd return by nightfall. The date was February 23. Within 2 hours, a fierce blizzard swept across the valley, one of those abrupt Montana tempests that blankets everything in white within minutes. Eric never returned home. 3 weeks later, Helga miscarried under the weight of stress and sorrow. The gradual famine had already begun before she forced herself to consume their remaining crumbs. With spring's arrival, she possessed nothing. No spouse, no infant, no livestock, no funds, only an abandoned cabin and a parcel of land. Moreover, she carried the chilling awareness of what genuine scarcity entailed. Throughout summer 1886, she dedicated herself to preparation. She cultivated a garden 3 times larger than necessary, laboring from sunrise to sunset. She tilled fresh earth to sow potatoes, turnips, carrots, and cabbages in lengthy rows stretching across her entire property. She purchased additional vegetables from all the farms in the valley, using cash earned through washing clothes, repairing garments, and accepting any job available. Helga considered herself prepared, but the nature of her readiness was beyond the imagination of anyone in Montana. Securing meat proved the most time-consuming task. In June, she shot a deer, a process taking 3 days, then sliced the flesh into strips, salted them, and hung them in a smokehouse constructed from salvaged lumber. She obtained a second deer in July, a third in August, and in September an elk, which provided more venison than the 3 deer altogether. Each piece was sliced thinly. She coated them with salt and pepper, then smoked them until they were as tough as leather. The preserved meat would remain edible until spring. The task of preserving felt never-ending. From the hills above her cabin, she collected wild berries, simmered them with sugar to make jams, and sealed them in glass jars with wax. She also pickled cucumbers and cabbage. Whatever could be preserved in brine found its way into a jar. Apples and pears from a nearby orchard were thinly sliced by her, then sun-dried until they became crisp for storage. After that, she constructed a root cellar inside another root cellar, dug 2.5 meters down into the Montana clay. Inside, the temperature remained between 4 degrees Celsius and 13 degrees Celsius. Straw and sawdust were placed as lining, followed by wooden planks forming insulation layers. These would keep her food from either freezing or going bad. Upon finishing, she had room to store 360 kilograms of supplies, and every bit of it was packed in September. Grandmother Svensson paid a visit, traveling all the way from her son's farm near Helena, as she was curious to see how Helga was getting along. At 83, she was almost blind and her hands were gnarled like claws from years of labor, yet her mind remained keen and she remembered everything. "You are doing it correctly," said Grandmother Svensson. With age-clouded eyes, she looked over the dark hole under Helga's cabin floor, sensing the cool air coming up. It was a quiet assurance of survival. This was how people survived back in their homeland. They relied not on the weather, the authorities, or even their neighbors. They placed their trust in themselves and the provisions they had stored. Helga was aware of the gossip. "People believe I'm insane." Helga recounted to her grandmother how Mrs. Blackwood, a woman of fancy dresses and an effortless existence, was spreading the word that Helga had gone mad. However, Mrs. Blackwood had never known real hunger. She was unfamiliar with the pain of seeing children become emaciated, their eyes appearing larger as their bodies wasted away. Neither did she understand the desperation of digging through snow, searching for anything that could sustain a family. After a pause, the elderly woman's look wandered, focusing on something distant. That memory was 5 decades old, from a land on the other side of the Atlantic. In 1867, Sweden experienced a famine that claimed 100,000 lives. At that time, Grandmother Svensson was 30. When the famine eventually subsided, she had to witness her mother and 2 sisters die from starvation. She pledged an oath. "I promised myself that I would never be caught without food ever again." She emphasized never. The worst phase went on for 3 years, yet the specific winter that killed her family extended for 7 months. Snow began in October and remained until May without thawing. People consumed grass, boiled leather. They resorted to acts that grandmother Svensson could still not talk about. She extended her hand and clutched Helga's with unexpected force. Set aside enough provisions for 7 months, she advised. Do not allow anyone to claim that's excessive. It's far from sufficient, but it's a beginning. Subscribe, the evidence arrived shortly, and it is not as she anticipated. The winter, spanning 1886 to 1887, became known as the Great Die-Up. That year, it started early, striking violently on 9th November. The initial snowfall blanketed the valley with 30 centimeters of white. That snow did not thaw. Additional snowfall arrived the following week and even more the week after. Come December, the snow depth reached 90 centimeters. By January, it was 1.8 meters deep. The temperature plummeted equally swiftly. Negative 29 degrees Celsius in early December, negative 34 degrees Celsius by Christmas, and negative 40 degrees Celsius in the second week of January. The cold was so severe that trees burst open during the night. The sap within them froze and swelled, causing trunks to split with noises akin to gunfire. Thousands of cattle perished. Some froze while standing. Others starved because they could not access grass beneath the snow. Cattle ranchers who once bragged about owning 100,000 animals saw their wealth disappear. Snowdrifts climbed to the rooflines of their barns, and in certain areas of Montana, 90% of the cattle perished. By February, millionaires who were wealthy in October had gone bankrupt. The territory's entire economy had collapsed. Snow, 1.8 meters deep, blanketed everything, and temperatures remained below freezing for weeks. Winter persisted relentlessly. February delivered additional snow, March brought further cold, and April appeared on the calendar. Yet winter seemed oblivious. Blizzards raged on, and snowdrifts mounted ever higher. Those who believed they were prepared discovered they were utterly unprepared. The Blackwood Ranch suffered the worst. In October, they owned 50,000 head of cattle. Come February, only 5,000 were left, and even these were perishing daily. Cordelia's magnificent home, adorned with Boston-made furniture and curtains, was now nearly out of food. Wagons could not traverse the deep snow, and hunting expeditions returned with nothing. The servants began to ration the flour and sugar that had appeared so abundant during the autumn. On the 19th of February, Cordelia Blackwood traveled to Helga's cabin. Her carriage was unable to pass through the snowdrifts, so she rode a horse instead. Her shiny black curls were concealed beneath a wool scarf, and she no longer wore her cameo brooch. Helga noticed the gauntness in Cordelia's face. It was the onset of starvation, the initial indication that a body was starting to feed on itself. "Mrs. Lynfist," Cordelia said, her voice rough, devoid of its usual Boston vivacity, "I have come to seek your assistance." Helga opened the door further, allowing the icy wind to rush past her into the cabin. Inside, her fire burned steadily, and her stored supplies lay ready in the pit beneath the floorboards. "Enter," she said. The warmth struck Cordelia like a tangible force. She had endured cold for so long that she had lost all memory of warmth. She swayed a little in the doorway, her eyes scanning the cabin. This was the very place she had ridiculed only half a year earlier. The hearth fire crackled merrily, and dried meat dangled from the rafters. Shelves everywhere were lined with jars of preserved fruit. What she had once dismissed as foolish, peasant-like preparation now shone like a beacon of hope. "We are nearly out of food," Cordelia said softly. "The supply wagons cannot get through. The hunting parties find nothing. The deer are dead. The elk have retreated to lower elevations. Everything edible has already been consumed." Cordelia gazed at Helga and swallowed with difficulty. Swallowing her pride, she continued, "I know I said things. I know I laughed at you, Mrs. Lynfist, but my children are starving. They are beginning to get that expression in their eyes, that hollow look, and I have no idea what to do." Helga remained silent. She walked to the center of the cabin, knelt down, and raised the trap door that concealed her storage pit. Cold air emanated from the dark hole. It bore the scent of soil and vegetables, and it smelled of survival itself. She descended a ladder into the deep pit, and shortly after emerged again. In her hand she carried a sack of potatoes, a jar of preserved pears, and a parcel of dried venison. She placed the food on the table. "This should last a week," she said, her voice calm and firm. "Return next week, and I will give you more." Cordelia stared at the food, then at Helga, then at the dark pit which still contained hundreds of pounds of supplies. "I don't understand," she whispered. "I mocked you. I told everyone you were insane. I ridiculed you for preparing for something that would never occur." Helga's icy blue eyes locked onto hers, composed and unflinching. "It did happen," Helga replied. "You were mistaken, and now you are hungry. I will not let your children go hungry, even though they didn't mock me." Since their mother is too proud to admit her mistake, she pushed the food closer to Cordelia. Helga told them to take the food and feed their families, and when spring arrives, whenever that may be, to remember that they survived thanks to a Swedish peasant who knew something they didn't. From 1886 to 1887, the winter stretched into May, bringing 7 months of snow, cold, and death. It mirrored the winter that had claimed Grandmother Spencen's family in Sweden half a century earlier. Lasting until May, the winter of 1886-1887 caused half of Montana's cattle to perish and dozens of ranchers to go bankrupt, ending the boom that had founded the territory. The Gallatin Valley, previously a summer paradise, turned into a graveyard by spring. Cattle carcasses covered fields and hillsides. There were far too many to bury, and they remained frozen, unable to decay. Every carcass stood as a monument to the folly of men who sought quick wealth without any preparation. The ranches, once bustling with hundreds of workers, now lay empty. Their owners had either fled, gone bankrupt, or committed suicide. Banks that had loaned money to cattle barons collapsed. Merchants who offered credit were destroyed, yet the small farms endured. Homesteaders who had stockpiled food, prepared for hardship, and heeded old wisdom rather than new promises survived the winter thin but alive. They grasped a lesson the ranchers never learned. Preparation outweighed ambition. 270 kilograms of stored vegetables turned out to be more valuable than 50,000 cattle on the open range. That winter, Helga Lynfist fed 11 families and opened her supplies to anyone who sought help. She rationed her food meticulously, counting every single potato. Each cup of dried beans was precisely measured, and she made her 270 kilograms of food last much longer than intended. She donated until scarcely anything remained, and some days she herself went without food so that the children could eat. The Blackwoods were just the earliest. The following week, the Hendersons arrived with 6 children, their eyes sunken and faces quiet. After that came the Millers, the Johnsons, and families Helga had never encountered before. Word spread that the Swedish widow had food while others had none. People traveled through blizzards and crawled over snowdrifts to get to her cabin, having no other option. At last, the snow melted, and Cordelia Blackwood returned to Helga's cabin. This time, she didn't come in her luxurious carriage. Instead, she walked 3 kilometers from the remnants of the Blackwood Ranch. In March, her husband had taken his own life, unable to confront the devastation. Cordelia's children were gaunt but alive, sustained by Helga's provisions through the harshest months. Cordelia was dressed in a plain wool garment. Her elegant Boston attire was gone, having been sold or bartered for food during the desperate weeks of April. "I have no idea how to express my gratitude," she said, her voice hoarse. She continued, "You saved my children's lives, you saved my life, and I repaid you with ridicule." Helga was already out in her garden, turning over the rich, dark soil that had finally thawed after 7 months of winter. Looking up, Helga replied in a calm, steady voice, "By keeping your children alive, you have repaid me. That is sufficient." Then, planting another seed, she added, "Next year, you will store your own provisions. Next year, you'll be prepared." Cordelia shook her head. "Next year, I won't be here," she said. She gazed across the valley, once a paradise, now strewn with dead cattle and shattered dreams. "I am taking my children back to Boston. I cannot endure another such winter. I lack the strength." She glanced around. "I believe civilization had reached Montana. I thought trains and telegraphs meant we no longer had to be afraid. I was mistaken. Civilization is just a word. Winter is tangible." During that summer, Grandmother Fenson passed away serenely at the age of 84. Her life spanned another famine and a winter lasting 7 months. confirming the truth of the lessons she had learned in Sweden. Helga made the journey to Helena for the funeral, as always. She stood beside the grave of the woman who had instilled in her the belief that food meant survival and that preparation was paramount. In 1889, Helga Lynfist remarried, this time to Thomas Lynfist. Despite sharing the surname, he was no relation to Eric. Thomas, a farmer, had also survived the Great Die-Up by stockpiling food, just as Helga had. That dreadful February, he had glimpsed her through the cabin window. He observed as she distributed supplies to starving families, donating food she could have hoarded. He was captivated by her generosity even before they exchanged a word. Come spring, he offered to assist with planting her garden. That autumn, they wed in a modest ceremony at the local Lutheran church. Together, they constructed a bigger farm featuring a root cellar capable of storing 900 kilograms of supplies. If necessary, this could sustain them for a year, and it was ample to share with anyone seeking assistance. They brought up 4 children, each taught from the earliest age that food was never to be taken for granted. They learned never to underestimate winter, and that being prepared made the difference between living and dying. The cabin under whose floor Helga had interred 270 kilograms of food remained standing until 1923, when it was ultimately demolished to allow for the construction of a new farmhouse. Beneath the floor, workers discovered the original storage pit, still in one piece. Lined with straw, sawdust, and wooden planks, it had kept her food preserved during Montana's most severe winter in history. They filled the pit with soil and constructed over it, wiping away all traces of what had taken place. Yet the story endured. The tale was passed down through Lynfist generations, recounted at family get-togethers and community gatherings, kept alive by those who grasped the importance of being prepared. One winter, as Helga Lynfist was bearing potatoes, Cordelia Blackwood drove up in her ornate carriage and inquired just what she was doing. The answer to that query lay in a legacy defined by survival, community, and deep wisdom about readiness. Genuine resilience stems not merely from preparing for the worst, but from sharing that readiness to fortify the community when the worst actually occurs. If you enjoy stories like these, please subscribe. I come across one every few weeks and leave a comment. Which forgotten old technique do you think still holds practical value that no one has yet recognized? This video's content is meant for educational and narrative storytelling. The incidents, characters. Additionally, the names shown are fictionalized for storytelling impact, but the technical concepts and historical background are grounded in real practices. The building methods described are from historical periods and may not comply with present-day building codes or safety regulations. Any application of these principles must be carried out under professional supervision and in accordance with all applicable laws and regulations. This video is not a substitute for professional, technical, or legal counsel.